The story you are about to hear is a compilation of documented true facts featuring historical characters, events, or places that has played a role in shaping history. Please sit back and listen as I recite this narrative for you.
Daniel Camargo Barbosa was a psychopathic serial killer from Colombia, South America. It is believed that he raped and killed over 150 young girls in Colombia and Ecuador during the 1970s and the 1980s. Barbosa's mother died before he had even reached the age of 1, and his father was overbearing and emotionally distant. Afterwards, his father married another woman who had infertility problems. This caused his new stepmother to become abusive to Daniel, humiliating him in various ways, one of which she dressed him up as a girl and forced him to go to school dressed that way, to where his peers and classmates made fun of him. Despite this humiliation, Daniel stood out as a great student at the Leon XIII School in Bogota. However, his desire to continue studying was hampered when he was forced to drop out of school to help his family financially. As an adult, Barbosa had a live-in relationship with a woman named Alcira, and they went on to have 2 children together. However, he fell in love with another woman named Esperanza, and they had planned to get married until he discovered she wasn't a virgin. This became the root of Barbosa's fixations. He and Esperanza formed an agreement that he would stay with her if she aided him in finding other virgin girls to have sex with. Esperanza would lure the young girls to the apartment and then drug them with sodium socanol sleeping pills so Barbosa could rape them. 5 young girls were raped in this manner, but they were all released without any further harm. However, the 5th girl reported the rape to the authorities and both were arrested. Barbosa was charged with sexual assault and convicted, sentenced to 3 years in prison, and Barbosa was initially grateful for the perceived leniency of the judge, swearing to repent and mend his ways. But another judge was brought in and he was instead sentenced to 8 years in prison. This provoked Barbosa to rebellious anger. He served his full sentence and was then released back into society. Barbosa was arrested in Brazil in 1973 for being undocumented. He was traveling and living under a false name, which led to his criminal records being delayed from Colombia, and he was subsequently deported. On his return to Colombia, he began selling televisions on the street in Barranquilla, and not long after this, he embarked on his reign of murderous terror. Shortly after returning to Colombia in 1973, Barbosa was walking past the school one day and kidnapped a young 9-year-old girl. He raped her and murdered her so she would not be able to tell the police. This was his first known murder, but it most certainly wouldn't be his last. He was caught and convicted of this murder after returning to the scene of the crime to retrieve a television and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. In December 1977, he was sent to the prison located in Gorgona, an island off Colombia. Barbosa escaped in November 1984 using a crudely built boat. He had spent quite a bit of time studying the current of the ocean, and after his escape, the authorities assumed he had either been eaten by sharks or had died at sea. However, he managed to make his way to Quito in Ecuador. From there, he traveled to Guayaquil by bus around December 5. On December 18, he kidnapped another 9-year-old girl. The following day, he kidnapped a 10-year-old girl. Between the years of 1984 and 1986, it is estimated Barbosa committed a minimum of 54 murders and rapes in Guayaquil. Because of the high number of victims, the authorities initially thought they were being committed by a group or a gang, never considering it could be the work of just one person. Barbosa slept on the streets and lived off the money he could gain by reselling ballpoint pens in the streets. Occasionally, he supplemented his income by selling clothing or small valuables belonging to his victims. Barbosa often pretended to be a foreigner who was looking for a church to lure his young victims outside the main part of town. He would flash large amounts of money in front of them and offer to pay them if they showed him how to get to the church. His victims were always young, helpless, and poor, many of who would be out on the streets trying to find some work. He pretended that he was a stranger to the area and hinted at the possibility of the girls getting a job at the factory. No one was suspicious of an older man accompanying a girl or young woman who could be his granddaughter. Once he had convinced them, He would tell them he knew of a shortcut through the woods. If they seemed hesitant or wary, he would let them go, as there were always plenty of other possible victims out there for him to try again with. When they were out of sight of potential witnesses, he would rape them and then kill them, usually by either strangling or stabbing them. Often, the bodies were dismembered using a machete. When Barbosa was asked later why he preferred children, he explained he liked to hear them cry. On February 26, 1986, Barbosa was arrested just minutes after he murdered a little girl. He had been approached by two policemen who thought he was acting suspiciously, and when they got close to him, they discovered he was carrying with him a bag containing the bloody clothes and clitoris of his latest victim. He initially told the police his name was Manuel Bulgarin Solis, but the surviving rape victim later identified him as Barbosa. He led authorities to the dumping grounds of those victims whose bodies had not yet been recovered. The bodies had been dismembered. While he told the Ecuadorian authorities of the locations of the bodies and how the sadistic crimes were committed, he showed no feelings of remorse. After raping his victims, he had hacked, slashed, and crushed the girls with a machete. He gave a cynical explanation for choosing children. He wanted virgins because they cried. This apparently gave him greater satisfaction. According to Barbosa, he killed because he wanted revenge on women's unfaithfulness. He hated them for not being what he believed women were supposed to be. He was convicted in 1989 but received only 16 years imprisonment as his sentence, which is the maximum in Ecuador. He was sent to the Garcia Moreno de Quito jail, which also housed Pedro Alonso Lopez. Barbosa was murdered in prison in November 1994. His murderer, Giovanni Noguera, was the nephew of one of his many victims. On March 9, 1994, a man turned himself into the New York State Police. He weaved a tale of multiple personalities, serial murder, repressed memories, and nearly 29 years on the run, having killed women in Yonkers, Mexico City, and San Francisco in the 1970s. Ricardo Caputo flew in from Argentina, his native country, to New York City because in the last year, he started to remember his crimes and feared the return of a homicidal alternate personality, so he turned himself in. Ricardo Caputo was a serial killer during the 1970s who was known as the Lady Killer. Though he was not definitively linked to any murders after 1977, he remained a fugitive throughout the 1980s and finally surrendered to police in 1994. Though he is known to have committed at least 4 murders, he is not considered by many to be a serial killer. Caputo was born in Mendoza, Argentina in 1949 and spent his childhood there. He was described as an athletic boy who loved swimming and running, and at one point, he had become quite an accomplished expert in martial arts. He was also very good at sketching, and this was his way of making money as an adult as he traveled, often sketching customers in bars in exchange for money. Caputo went to New York in 1970 on a 6-month visa. At that time, his visa was granted because there was no prior history of criminal activity or mental health problems in his background. He began working as a waiter and a busboy in various restaurants, and eventually was hired by the Plaza Hotel as a custodian. At a local bank where he cashed his paychecks, he met a teller named Natalie Brown, who was 19 years old and lived on Long Island with her parents. Before long, they started dating. She was an attractive young lady with long dark hair and a lovely smile. Her goal was to follow in her mother's footsteps and become a nurse. Brown's family lived the opposite to Caputo. While he lived in cheap rented rooms and worked a menial job, her family were far more affluent. However, they continued dating, and a year later, they traveled around Europe together. On their return to the United States, they announced their engagement, but a marriage would never take place and the relationship was far from good. The body of Natalie Brown was found stabbed to death on July 31, 1971. Caputo was immediately suspected and arrested. However, he was deemed incompetent to stand trial and instead was sent to Matiawan State Hospital for psychiatric treatment. he was under the care of Judith Becker, a psychologist at the prison hospital. Caputo was moved to the Manhattan Psychiatric Center in October 1973 and was given furloughs from the hospital occasionally. Often, he would turn up at Judith Becker's home and she tried to be friendly with him. On October 21, 1974, her body was found severely beaten and strangled with a stocking. Caputo was again immediate suspect and police began looking for him. Caputo went to San Francisco to evade capture and there he killed another woman. Barbara Taylor, a film consultant, was found in 1975 beaten to death. Her boyfriend was suspected and when a photo of him was circulated, it was found to resemble Caputo, although a different name had been used. Once again, Caputo went on the run and this time he went to Mexico City. There, he killed Laura Gomez in 1977, though little is known about this murder. Officials in Mexico City could not be reached to confirm that the woman was killed or that Mr. Caputo was a suspect in the killing. In the last 17 years, as his trail grew cold, he became a bigamist with 2 wives and 4 children in this country and South America. He traveled freely and worked as a cook, a salesman, a karate instructor, an English teacher, and a restaurant manager in the Midwest and Southwest. In 1991, he was featured on the Fox television program America's Most Wanted, but was by then hiding in South America. Then 2 years ago, he now says, he began having nightmares reliving the killings of 4 women and glimpsing again the killer he says he had suppressed within him for years. Portraying himself as fearful that he might kill again and stricken with remorse, he says he made arrangements with a brother and a lawyer, flew to New York on Wednesday, surrendered and confessed to 4 killings. He thus ended his strange life on the run and resurrected a serial murder case that had intrigued and mystified authorities for 2 decades. Caputo managed to stay undetected for almost 20 years and would have continued to get away with the murders if he hadn't turned himself in. On March 1994, claiming that his victims were haunting him and that he feared he would kill again, he turned himself in. Caputo was remembering the crimes he committed and claiming he had an alternate personality. He was terrified of this murderous personality coming back. He was found fit to stand trial and was found guilty of committing 2 of the murders. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Caputo died in prison in 1997 after suffering a fatal heart attack while playing basketball in the prison courtyard. He was 48 years old.
Hey everyone! I just wanted to express how grateful I am that you took the time to listen to my narration. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I am Twisted Mind and please enjoy the rest of your day. Salamat!